You laughed at him for walking with a limp, but you had no idea he was carrying the nation's highest honor for valor. 17-year-old Marcus Chen thought he was just picking on the quiet school janitor. What he discovered 20 minutes later would change his life forever and teach an entire high school the true meaning of heroism. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the main hallway of Roosevelt High School as students rushed between classes, their sneakers squeaking against the polished linoleum floors. It was just after lunch on a Tuesday afternoon, and the usual chaos of teenage energy filled the corridors. Backpacks slung over shoulders, conversations about weekend plans, the distant sound of locker doors slamming shut. Just another ordinary day in suburban California. But for 58-year-old Samuel Rodriguez, every day at Roosevelt High was a quiet mission of service. He had been the head custodian for nearly 15 years, arriving before dawn and often staying well past the final bell. His weathered hands gripped the handle of his industrial mop bucket as he navigated the hallways, his distinctive gait immediately noticeable to anyone who paid attention. His left leg dragged slightly with each step, the result of what most assumed was simply the wear and tear of age, or perhaps an old workplace injury. Samuel never spoke about his limp. He never spoke about much of anything, really. The students knew him as the quiet man who cleaned up their messes, who fixed broken desks without complaint, who somehow always appeared when something needed attention. He wore the same navy blue uniform every day, his name embroidered in simple white letters across the chest pocket. His graying hair was always neatly combed, his face kind but reserved. To most of the students, he was invisible, just part of the school's background machinery. But Marcus Chen saw him differently. Where others saw a dedicated worker, Marcus saw an easy target. The 17-year-old had been struggling with his own insecurities, his grades slipping, his parents constantly pressuring him about college applications. He had fallen in with a group of kids who seemed to find their confidence by tearing others down, and Samuel's quiet nature made him a frequent subject of their cruel entertainment. Marcus stood with his usual crew near the water fountains, watching as Samuel approached with his cleaning cart. The older man moved methodically, his practiced routine taking him past the same spots every day at the same time. As he drew closer, Marcus felt the familiar urge to assert himself, to get a laugh from his friends at someone else's expense. "Hey guys, watch this," Marcus whispered to his companions, a smirk playing across his face. Time for the gimp parade. As Samuel passed by, focusing on a scuff mark on the floor, Marcus began an exaggerated imitation of his walk. He dragged his left foot dramatically, swinging his hip in an over-the-top mockery of Samuel's careful gait. His friends snickered, some pulling out their phones to record the performance. "Look at me, I'm the school janitor," Marcus announced loudly enough for other students to hear. "Can't even walk right, but somehow still has a job. Maybe if I limp hard enough, they'll give me a pension." The laughter from his group grew louder, drawing more attention from passing students. Some looked uncomfortable, others simply kept walking, but a few stopped to watch the cruel show. Marcus, emboldened by the audience, continued his performance, adding sound effects and dramatic flourishes to his mocking walk. Samuel heard the commotion but didn't turn around immediately. He had endured this kind of behavior before, not just from Marcus but from others over the years. His shoulders tensed slightly, but he continued with his work, methodically cleaning the same spot he had been focused on. The whispers and giggles behind him weren't new, but they never stopped stinging. "Hey, Mr. Rodriguez," Marcus called out, his voice dripping with false concern. "You know they make medicine for that walking problem, right? Maybe you should see a doctor instead of just dragging that leg around all day." This time Samuel did turn around. His dark eyes met Marcus's. with a quiet dignity that should have been enough to stop the harassment. But Marcus was too caught up in his performance, too addicted to the attention and laughter of his peers, to recognize the strength in that steady gaze. "What's wrong with your leg anyway?" Marcus continued, his voice carrying down the hallway. "Did you fall off a ladder while cleaning windows? Trip over your own mop bucket?" Samuel set down his cleaning supplies and faced the group of teenagers. His voice, when he finally spoke, was calm and measured, with just a hint of an accent that spoke to his immigrant roots. "I'm just trying to do my job, son," he said quietly. "Maybe you should focus on yours." The word son seemed to trigger something in Marcus. Perhaps it was the gentle authority in Samuel's voice, or the way he didn't rise to the bait with anger or defensiveness. Whatever it was, it made Marcus feel small, and that feeling only fueled his cruelty. "Don't call me son," Marcus snapped. "And don't act like you're better than me just because you've been limping around this school for years. At least I can walk without looking like a broken robot." The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Samuel's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Pain, perhaps, or disappointment. Not at the insult to his physical limitation, but at the casual cruelty of youth. The way respect had to be earned through fear, rather than simply given as a basic human courtesy. Other students in the hallway had stopped to watch now. Some looked uncomfortable with Marcus's behavior, but none stepped forward to intervene. It was easier to be a bystander, to let someone else deal with the awkwardness of confrontation. A few teachers were visible in the distance, but they were too far away to hear the exchange clearly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Samuel picked up his cleaning supplies again, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He had learned long ago that dignity was something you carried within yourself, not something that could be given or taken away by others. But as he turned to continue down the hallway, Marcus wasn't finished. "That's right, just limp away," Marcus called after him. "Maybe if you walk fast enough, people won't notice how pathetic you look." The cruel laughter of Marcus's friends echoed through the hallway as Samuel continued his work. But something had shifted in the older man's demeanor. His jaw was set with a different kind of determination now, and his eyes held a steely resolve. That hadn't been there before. He had been patient, understanding, forgiving. But patience had its limits, and even the most humble servant had a breaking point. What Marcus didn't know, what none of the students knew, was that Samuel Rodriguez had spent 22 years in the United States Army. He had served 3 tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan, leading men through some of the most dangerous combat zones in modern warfare. The limp that Marcus mocked so cruelly was the result of a roadside bomb that had killed 2 of Samuel's closest friends and left him with shrapnel in his leg and a purple heart on his chest. But that wasn't the medal that mattered most. Hidden away in Samuel's small apartment, in a place of honor above his kitchen table, was a blue ribbon holding a 5-pointed star surrounded by a wreath of green laurel leaves. The Medal of Honor, the nation's highest award for military valor, earned on a blood-soaked afternoon in Afghanistan, when Samuel had single-handedly held off an enemy assault long enough for his wounded comrades to be evacuated to safety. Citation read in part, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty." But Samuel had never spoken of that day, not to his colleagues, not to the students, not even to most of his family. The memories were too painful, the weight of survival too heavy to share casually. As he continued his work that afternoon, Samuel made a decision. He had tried to handle Marcus's harassment with patience and understanding, hoping the young man would eventually grow out of his cruelty. But some lessons couldn't be learned through gentle guidance. Sometimes respect had to be earned through revelation, and dignity had to be defended through truth. The final bell rang, and students began flooding out of classrooms toward their lockers and the exits. Samuel watched the familiar end-of-day chaos with different eyes now. Tomorrow would bring a new challenge, a new opportunity to teach a lesson. That couldn't be found in any textbook. Marcus Chen thought he knew who Samuel Rodriguez was, but he was about to discover that sometimes the most powerful people are the ones who choose to remain silent about their strength. The custodian finished, cleaning the hallway where the incident had occurred, his movements still careful and deliberate despite the pain in his leg. As he worked, he began to formulate a plan. Not for revenge, but for education. Not to humiliate Marcus the way he had been humiliated, but to show him something about honor, about service, about the kind of man who chooses to spend his days cleaning up after others, not because he has to, but because he understands that every form of honest work has dignity. The empty hallway fell silent except for the sound of Samuel's mop bucket wheels rolling. Across the linoleum floor, tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, Marcus Chen would learn what it meant to mock a hero. The next morning arrived with the usual pre-dawn stillness that Samuel Rodriguez had grown to cherish over his 15 years. At Roosevelt High, at 4:30 in the morning, while most of the world still slept, he unlocked the heavy metal doors of the school and stepped into the familiar darkness of empty hallways. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant hum of heating systems and the soft echo of his footsteps against polished floors. This was Samuel's sanctuary, these quiet hours before the chaos of teenage energy filled every corner of the building. He moved through his opening routine with practiced efficiency, switching on lights section by section, checking that everything was secure and ready for another day of learning. His cleaning cart rolled smoothly beside him, loaded with the tools of his trade, each item in its designated place. But this morning was different. As Samuel worked, his mind kept returning to the previous day's encounter with Marcus Chen. The young man's cruel words echoed in his memory, not because they hurt his feelings, but because they revealed something troubling about the character being shaped within these walls. Samuel had seen too much in his lifetime to be wounded by the thoughtless comments of a teenager, but he had also seen enough to recognize when a young person was heading down a dangerous path. The custodian paused in his work, leaning against his mop handle as he stood in the exact spot where Marcus had performed his mocking imitation. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the empty hallway, and Samuel could almost see the ghost of yesterday's humiliation playing out before him. But instead of anger or resentment, he felt something else entirely: sadness, not for himself, but for a young man who had somehow learned that cruelty was an acceptable way to build himself up. Samuel's thoughts drifted to another young man. From long ago, a soldier under his command named Private Tommy Martinez. Tommy had been about Marcus's age when he arrived in Afghanistan, full of bravado and stupid courage, always ready with a joke at someone else's expense. Like Marcus, Tommy had used humor as a shield, deflecting his own fears and insecurities by making others the target of his wit. The memory was vivid now, played out against the backdrop of the empty school hallway. Samuel remembered the day. Tommy had made fun of their interpreter, a local Afghan man named Hassan, who walked with a severe limp from childhood polio. Tommy had mimicked Hassan's walk behind his back, getting laughs from some of the other soldiers, never knowing that Hassan spoke enough English to understand exactly what was happening. Samuel had pulled Tommy aside that evening, not to punish him but to teach him. He had told Tommy about Hassan's story, how the man had risked his life daily to help American forces, how he had lost 3 brothers to Taliban violence because of his cooperation with the coalition, how his limp was not a source of shame but a badge of survival, a reminder of a childhood spent dodging bullets and bombs in a war-torn country. The conversation had changed Tommy, really changed him. The young soldier had sought out Hassan the next day, not to apologize with empty words, but to learn from him. Tommy had spent his off-duty hours helping Hassan with various tasks around the base, and Hassan had taught him phrases in Dari and Pashto. They had become unlikely friends, the wise older man and the humbled young soldier. 3 weeks later, Tommy Martinez died in Samuel's arms after their convoy hit an improvised explosive device. His last words were not about going home or seeing his family again. He had whispered Hassan's name, asking Samuel to tell the interpreter that he was sorry, that he finally understood what it meant to see people as more than their surface appearances. Samuel shook his head, bringing himself back to the present moment in the empty school hallway. The memory of Tommy's transformation and tragic death had haunted him for years, but it had also taught him something crucial about the power of understanding, about the possibility of redemption that existed in every human heart. He resumed his work, but with a new sense of purpose. Marcus Chen reminded him of Tommy Martinez, not just in his casual cruelty, but in his potential for growth. The question was how to reach that potential, how to create a moment of understanding that could change a young man's trajectory without destroying his spirit in the process. As the morning progressed and the first teachers began arriving for their early meetings, Samuel found himself observing the school community with fresh eyes. He watched Mrs. Patterson, the elderly math teacher, struggling to carry a heavy box of textbooks from her car. Without being asked, he appeared at her side, taking the weight from her arms and walking her to her classroom. She thanked him with genuine warmth, the kind of gratitude that came from years of small kindnesses accumulated over time. He noticed Mr. Williams, the young history teacher, looking frustrated as he tried to set up a new projector for his first period class. Samuel quietly slipped into the room and had the equipment working in under 5 minutes, showing the teacher the proper sequence of buttons and connections. Mr. Williams looked at him with a mixture of relief and admiration, shaking his hand with real appreciation. These moments of connection, of service rendered without expectation of recognition, were what Samuel valued most about his work. He had commanded soldiers in combat, had made life-and-death decisions under enemy fire, had been decorated by generals and politicians. But there was something pure about the simple act of helping a teacher hang a poster or mopping up a spilled drink before someone could slip and fall. As students began arriving for the day, Samuel positioned himself strategically in the main hallway, not to confront Marcus, but to observe him. He wanted to understand the young man better, to see beyond the surface cruelty to whatever pain or insecurity was driving his behavior. Marcus appeared right on schedule, surrounded by his usual group of followers. Samuel watched as the teenager interacted with different people, noting the way he seemed to need constant validation from his peers, the way his jokes always came at someone else's expense. It was a pattern Samuel recognized from his military days, the behavior of someone who felt powerless in their own life and sought to regain control by diminishing others. But Samuel also noticed something else. Between the cruel comments and the show-off behavior, there were moments when Marcus's guard dropped. When he thought no one was looking, his expression would shift, revealing glimpses of uncertainty and fear. Samuel saw him check his phone repeatedly, his face tightening. With each message, he observed the way Marcus's shoulders sagged when his friends weren't around, the way he seemed to shrink into himself when he thought he was alone. The custodian's trained eye, honed by years of reading battlefield situations and assessing soldier morale, told him that Marcus Chen was struggling with more than just teenage arrogance. There was something deeper going on, some pressure or pain that was manifesting as cruelty toward others. During his lunch break, Samuel did something he rarely did. He walked to the school's administrative office and asked to speak with the guidance counselor, Mrs. Jennifer Adams. She was a kind woman in her 40s who had always treated Samuel with respect and genuine friendliness. "Samuel, what can I do for you?" she asked, gesturing for him to sit in the chair across from her desk. "I want to ask you about one of your students," Samuel said carefully. "Marcus Chen. I've noticed he seems to be struggling with some things." and I wondered if there was anything I should know about his situation. Mrs. Adams looked surprised. It was unusual for the custodial staff to inquire about specific students, but she had known Samuel long enough to trust his judgment. She glanced at her computer screen, pulling up Marcus's file. "I can't share specific details," she said, "but I can tell you that Marcus has been dealing with some significant family pressures lately. His parents are going through a difficult divorce, and there are high expectations around his academic performance. He's been acting out more than usual, and we've had a few incidents reported." Samuel nodded, understanding beginning to form in his mind. "Has anyone tried to connect with him? Really connect, I mean?" Mrs. Adams sighed. "We've offered counseling services, but he's resistant. His parents are focused on his grades and college applications. I think he feels like he's drowning in expectations and doesn't know how to ask for help." The pieces were coming together now. Marcus's cruelty wasn't born from genuine malice, but from a desperate need to feel powerful in a life where he felt completely powerless. His mocking of Samuel's limp was a way of asserting dominance over someone he perceived as safe to target, someone who wouldn't fight back or report him to authorities. Samuel thanked Mrs. Adams and returned to his work, but his mind was already formulating a plan. Not a plan for revenge or humiliation, but a plan for education and redemption. He had learned in the military that the most effective way to change someone's behavior was not through punishment, but through understanding. Not through breaking them down, but through showing them a better way to build themselves up. That afternoon, as classes ended and students filled the hallways for the final dismissal, Samuel made his way to his small office in the basement of the school. It was a cluttered space filled with cleaning supplies, broken furniture waiting for repair, and the accumulated odds and ends of 15 years of custodial work. But in the bottom drawer of his desk, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, was something that most people would never have expected to find in a janitor's office. The Medal of Honor gleamed in the fluorescent light, its blue ribbon still vibrant despite the years. Samuel held it carefully, remembering the day it had been placed around his neck by the President of the United States. He remembered the weight of it, not just the physical weight, but the emotional burden of knowing that this highest honor had been earned through the deaths of good men, through survival when others had not been so fortunate. The citation came flooding back to him as he held the medal. The day had started like any other patrol in the mountains of Afghanistan. Samuel had been a master sergeant then, leading a small unit through a valley that intelligence had deemed relatively safe. But intelligence had been wrong. The Taliban had been waiting, had turned the valley into a killing field with carefully positioned snipers and machine gun nests. When the ambush began, Samuel's unit had been caught in the open, pinned down by devastating crossfire. 3 of his men had been wounded in the first 30 seconds, including his radio operator, cutting off their communication with headquarters. The enemy fire was so intense that any movement seemed impossible, but the wounded soldiers were bleeding out. In the middle of the field, Samuel had made a decision that defied all tactical logic. He had left the safety of his covered position and run into the open ground, directly into the enemy fire. Not once, but 4 times. Each trip across that bullet-swept field had been to drag a wounded soldier to safety, to provide medical aid under fire, to shield his men with his own body while calling in air support on a radio he had salvaged from a destroyed vehicle. The 4th trip had been for Private Martinez, the young soldier who had mocked their interpreter just weeks before. Tommy had been the most severely wounded, his legs shattered by shrapnel, conscious but unable to move. When Samuel reached him, Tommy had looked up with eyes full of pain and fear. "Sarge, I can't feel my legs," Tommy had whispered. "I'm not going to make it." Samuel had looked into that young face, had seen the terror and regret there, and had made a promise. "You're going home, soldier. I'm going to make sure you see your family again." The enemy fire had intensified as Samuel began dragging Tommy across the field, bullets kicking up dirt around them, the sound of automatic weapons fire deafening. Halfway to safety, Samuel had been hit by shrapnel in his left leg, the same injury that would leave him with the limp that Marcus Chen mocked decades later. But Samuel had kept moving, had kept dragging Tommy toward the makeshift aid station. That had been set up behind a rocky outcropping. Blood was flowing from his own wound, but he had refused to stop, refused to leave the young soldier behind. The pain in his leg had been excruciating, but the determination to save Tommy had been stronger. Tommy Martinez had lived. He had been evacuated to Germany, then to Walter Reed Medical Center, then home to his family in Texas. Samuel had received a letter from him 6 months later, written from a rehabilitation center where Tommy was learning to walk again with prosthetic legs. The letter had been full of gratitude, but also of transformation. Tommy had written about becoming a counselor for other wounded veterans, about finding purpose and helping others heal from trauma. "You didn't just save my life that day, Sarge," Tommy had written. "You saved my soul. You showed me what it means to put others before yourself, to find strength in service rather than in tearing others down. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be the kind of man you are." Samuel carefully wrapped the Medal of Honor back in its tissue paper and returned it to the drawer. Tomorrow he would bring it to school, not to show off or to demand recognition, but to teach a lesson that couldn't be learned from any textbook. Marcus Chen needed to understand that strength wasn't about mocking others' weaknesses, but about lifting others up despite your own pain. The school had emptied out now, leaving Samuel alone with his thoughts and his plans. As he finished his evening cleaning routine, he thought about Tommy Martinez and Marcus Chen, about the thin line between cruelty and compassion, about the power of understanding to transform even the hardest hearts. Tomorrow would bring a new opportunity, a chance to plant seeds of wisdom in young soil. Samuel Rodriguez, Medal of Honor recipient, war hero, and humble school custodian, was ready to teach the most important lesson of his long career in service. Sometimes the greatest victories weren't won on battlefields, but in the quiet moments, when one human being chose to see the potential for good in another. I'll proceed with part 3 of your story, ensuring it's between 3,000 to 3,500 words, without redundancy and focusing on motivational and inspirational scenarios. Part 3. The courage to begin the morning after their conversation beneath the stars. Kai found himself standing at the edge of the village square, watching the early merchants set up their stalls. The familiar sight that once brought comfort now stirred something restless within him. Master Chun's words echoed in his mind. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. But first, you must decide which direction to face. "You're up early," a voice called out. Kai turned to see May approaching, carrying a basket of fresh herbs from her grandmother's garden. Her presence had always been a source of quiet strength, and today was no different. "Couldn't sleep," Kai admitted, his eyes scanning the horizon beyond the village walls. "Every time I close my eyes, I see myself 10 years from now, still standing in this same spot, still wondering what lies beyond those mountains." May set down her basket and stood beside him, following his gaze. "My grandmother once told me about a bird that lived its entire life in a golden cage. The cage was beautiful, comfortable, and safe. One day, the door was left open, and the bird had to choose: stay in the familiarity of its cage or fly into the unknown. What did it choose?" Kai asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "That's the thing," May said with a gentle smile. "The story changes depending on who tells it. Some say the bird flew away immediately, drunk on the possibility of freedom. Others say it stayed, finding contentment in what it knew. But my grandmother's version was different. She said the bird spent days perched at the open door, singing a new song each day until it finally understood that the cage had never truly held it captive. Its own fear had." As if summoned by their conversation, Master Chen appeared, his weathered traveling cloak billowing in the morning breeze. "Ah, young Kai, I see the seeds of decision have begun to sprout." "Master Chen," Kai bowed respectfully. "I've been thinking about what you said, about choosing a direction. But how do I know which path is right?" The old sage chuckled, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Let me share with you a tale from my own youth. When I was not much older than you, I stood at a crossroads, quite literally. 3 paths stretched before me. One led to a prestigious monastery where I could study under renowned masters, another to a bustling city full of opportunities, and the third, well, the third was barely a path at all, just a faint trail, disappearing into the wilderness. Which did you choose?" May asked, drawn into the story. "I sat at that crossroads for 3 days and 3 nights, paralyzed by the weight of the decision. On the 3rd night, an old woman appeared, seemingly from nowhere. She asked me what I was doing, and I explained my dilemma. She laughed and sighed, 'Young fool, you've been so focused on choosing the right path that you've failed to realize something important. All paths lead somewhere. The question isn't which path is right, but which journey will teach you what you need to learn.'" Master Chen paused, his eyes twinkling with memory. "I chose the wilderness trail, not because it was right or wrong, but because it frightened me the most. And in facing that fear, I discovered strengths I never knew I possessed." As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the square, a commotion arose near the village gates. A merchant caravan had arrived, its wagons laden with goods from distant lands. Among the travelers was a young woman, perhaps a few years older than Kai, whose confident stride and sun-weathered skin spoke of countless miles traveled. She caught sight of the small group and approached. "Greetings," she said, her voice carrying the musical accent of the eastern provinces. "I'm Lyra, caravan guard and seeker of stories. Might you know where I could find food and rest?" May quickly offered directions to the inn, but Kai found himself captivated by this stranger who wore the road like a second skin. "You're a guard? For the merchants?" Lyra grinned, a flash of white teeth against bronze skin. "Among other things. I've been a mapmaker's assistant, a translator, a mediator in trade disputes, and once, memorably, a temporary shepherd when we found an abandoned flock in the mountains. The road teaches you to be many things. Weren't you afraid?" Kai asked before he could stop himself. "Leaving home, not knowing what you'd find?" "Terrified," Lyra admitted without hesitation. "The first night I spent alone under the stars, I cried myself to sleep, certain I'd made the worst mistake of my life. But fear is a strange companion. Once you learn to walk alongside it, instead of running from it, you discover it's not trying to stop you, it's trying to prepare you." Master Chen nodded approvingly. Wisdom earned through experience. "Tell me, young traveler, what made you take that first step?" Lyra's expression grew thoughtful. "My village was struck by a drought. The elders said it was the worst in living memory. We needed help, supplies, new techniques for water conservation. But no one wanted to leave to seek aid. Everyone had responsibilities, families, fears. I realized that sometimes the greatest service you can offer your home is to leave it, to bring back what it needs to survive and thrive." "And did you?" May asked softly. "Save your village?" "Not in the way I expected," Lyra replied. "I found water engineers in the city of Qinghai who taught me about irrigation. I met traders who showed me drought-resistant crops. But more importantly, I discovered that our village's isolation was its greatest threat. Now we're part of a network of communities that support each other through hard times. My leaving opened a door that has since welcomed many through it." The conversation continued as the morning sun reached its zenith. Kai found himself hanging on every word as Lyra shared tales of her travels, navigating sandstorms in the western deserts, mediating between feuding merchant families, learning to read the stars from nomadic tribes. But surely you must miss home, Kai said. Don't you ever regret leaving? Lyra's expression softened. Every day. But missing something doesn't mean you've made the wrong choice. It means you've loved well. I carry my home with me, she touched her heart, and because of that, I can find pieces of it everywhere I go. The smell of jasmine tea reminds me of my mother's garden. The sound of children laughing brings back memories of teaching my younger siblings. Home isn't just a place, it's a feeling you can cultivate wherever you are. As the day wore on, Master Chen suggested they adjourn to the tea house. Over steaming cups of oolong, the conversation deepened. Lyra spoke of the practical aspects of travel, how to read weather signs, what to pack, how to find trustworthy companions. But she also shared the deeper lessons. The road strips away everything unnecessary, she explained. You learn quickly what truly matters. Not the possessions you carry, but the strength of your spirit. Not the comfort of routine, but the adaptability of your mind. Every challenge becomes a teacher if you're willing to learn. What was your greatest challenge? Kai asked. Lyra was quiet for a long moment. Loneliness, she finally said. Not the simple kind that comes from being alone. I learned to enjoy my own company. But the deeper loneliness of being surrounded by people who don't understand. Your journey. I met many who thought I was foolish for choosing uncertainty over security. Learning to hold true to my path despite their doubts. That was harder than any physical hardship. Master Chen stroked his beard thoughtfully. And yet, here you are, sharing your story with eager listeners. The universe has a way of bringing together those who need each other's wisdom. As afternoon shadows lengthened, May excused herself to help her grandmother, but not before squeezing Kai's shoulder. Whatever you decide, she whispered, know that you have the strength for it. Left with Master Chen and Lyra, Kai felt the weight of decision pressing upon him. I want to go, he admitted, the words tumbling out. Every fiber of my being wants to see what's beyond these walls, but I'm afraid of failing. Of discovering I'm not strong enough, smart enough, brave enough. Ah, Master Chen said. Now we reach the heart of it. Lyra, would you share with him the parable of the 2 seeds? Lyra nodded. 2 seeds lay side by side in the fertile earth. The first seed said, I want to grow. I want to send my roots deep into the soil and push my sprouts through the earth above me. I want to feel the warmth of the sun on my face and the blessing of the morning dew on my petals. And so it grew. The second seed said, I am afraid. If I send my roots into the ground below, I don't know what I will encounter in the dark. If I push through the hard soil above me, I may damage my delicate sprouts. If I open my buds, a bird may eat them. It is better and safer for me to wait until conditions are perfect. And so it waited. Spring came, and the first seed grew into a beautiful plant, dancing in the breeze and basking in the sun. The second seed, still waiting for perfect conditions, was discovered by a hen scratching the ground for food and was promptly eaten. Kai felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. So the lesson is that inaction is the greatest risk? The lesson, Master Chen corrected gently, is that growth requires risk. The first seed didn't know it would become a beautiful plant. It simply chose growth over stagnation. Every great journey begins not with certainty of success, but with the courage to begin. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Lyra stood to leave. The caravan departs at dawn, she said. We're heading east toward the Jade Mountains, then north to the trading cities. If you're looking for a way to begin your journey, Kai, we could use another pair of hands. The merchants pay fairly, and you'd have experienced travelers to learn from. Kai's heart leaped at the opportunity, but doubt quickly followed. I don't know anything about guarding caravans. I've never even been in a real fight. Neither had I when I started, Lyra said with a kind smile. We all begin as beginners. The question is, are you willing to learn? After Lyra left to prepare for the evening, Kai and Master Chen sat in comfortable silence, watching the village settle into its evening rhythms. Families gathered for dinner, children were called in from play, and the familiar sounds of home wrapped around them like a well-worn blanket. Master Chen, Kai finally spoke. How do you know when you're ready? The old sage smiled. You don't. Readiness is an illusion, a comfortable lie we tell ourselves to delay action. You prepare as best you can, yes, but at some point, you must trust in your ability to handle whatever comes. The river doesn't wait until it's ready to flow to the sea. It simply follows its nature. But what if I regret it? What if I realize I've made a terrible mistake? Then you'll have learned something valuable about yourself, Master Chen replied. Regret is not failure, it's information. Every choice teaches us about who we are and who we wish to become. The only true failure is to let fear choose for you. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Kai made his way home, his mind swirling with possibilities. He found his parents in the kitchen, his mother preparing the evening meal while his father mended a fishing net. Mother, father, he began, his voice steadier than he felt. I need to speak with you about something important. His mother looked up, and he saw in her eyes that she already knew. Mothers always did. Sit, she said gently. Tell us what's in your heart. Kai spoke of his dreams, his fears, and the opportunity Lyra had presented. He watched his father's hands still on the net, saw his mother's knuckles whiten as she gripped the ladle. When he finished, silence settled over the kitchen like a heavy blanket. Finally, his father spoke. When I was young, I dreamed of being a scholar. I wanted to study in the great libraries, to unlock the mysteries of the ancient texts. But my father needed help with the fishing, and I told myself I would go later when things were more settled. He looked at his son with eyes full of unspoken emotion. Things are never settled, Kai. There's always another season, another responsibility, another reason to wait. I don't regret the life I've built. I love your mother. I'm proud of our family. But I wonder sometimes who I might have become if I'd had the courage to chase my dreams. His mother moved to stand behind his father, her hand on his shoulder. We've always known you were meant for something beyond these walls, she said softly. We've been selfish, keeping you close because we love you. But love isn't about holding on. It's about giving those we love the freedom to become who they're meant to be. Kai felt tears sting his eyes. I don't want to disappoint you. The only way you could disappoint us, his mother said firmly, is by living a life that isn't truly yours. We raised you to be strong, kind, and brave. Now it's time for you to use those gifts. That night, Kai packed carefully, following the advice Lyra had given. He chose practical clothes, a sturdy pair of boots his father had been saving for, a special occasion, and a few precious mementos. His mother pressed a small pouch into his hands. Money they'd been saving, she said, for his future. His father gave him a knife that had belonged to his grandfather, its handle worn smooth by generations of use. For protection, his father said gruffly, and for remembering that you come from a long line of survivors. As dawn approached, Kai stood once more at his window, watching the sky lighten. But this time, instead of feeling trapped, he felt poised on the edge of flight. The fear was still there, a flutter in his stomach, but it was joined by something stronger, anticipation. He made his way to the village gates, where the caravan was preparing to depart. Lyra greeted him with a knowing smile. Light packer. Good. You learn fast. Master Chen was there too, despite the early hour. A small gift, he said, presenting Kai with a leather-bound journal. For recording your journey. The external one, yes, but more importantly, the internal one. Write down not just what you see, but how it changes you. May arrived just as the caravan was about to leave, breathless from running. I couldn't let you go without saying goodbye. she said, pressing a small cloth bundle into his hands. "Jasmine tea," she explained, "so you can carry the scent of home with you." As the caravan began to move, Kai took his place among the guards and traders, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. He looked back once at the village that had been his entire world, seeing his parents standing at the gate, his mother leaning into his father's strength. Then he faced forward, toward the mountains that had called to him for so long. The sun was rising, painting the peaks in shades of gold and promise. With each step, the village grew smaller behind him, but Kai didn't feel like he was losing something. Instead, he felt like he was finally becoming. The road stretched ahead, dusty and uncertain, full of challenges he couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time in his life, Kai wasn't looking at the horizon with longing. He was walking toward it, one courageous step at a time. As Master Chen had said, the journey of 1,000 miles had begun. Not with certainty or readiness, but with the simple, profound act of choosing to begin. The first 3 days on the road shattered every romantic notion Kai had harbored about travel. His feet, despite the sturdy boots, developed blisters that burst and reformed. His shoulders ached from the unfamiliar weight of his pack. When evening came and the caravan made camp, he could barely manage to help with the basic tasks before collapsing onto his bedroll. "Hurting?" Lyra asked on the third night, finding him soaking his feet in a stream near their campsite. "Everything hurts," Kai admitted, too exhausted for pride. "I thought I was strong. I've worked in the fields, hauled water, chopped wood. But this is different," Lyra finished. "Your village strength was built for village tasks. Now, you're building road strength. Different muscles, different endurance. The body adapts, but first it protests." An older caravan guard named Marcus approached, his weathered face creased with sympathy. "First journey is always the hardest," he said, settling down on a nearby rock. "Not just because of the physical demands, but because you're shedding your old skin. Like a snake, you know. The new skin underneath is tender, vulnerable. But it's also stronger than what came before." "How long before it gets easier?" Kai asked. Marcus and Lyra exchanged knowing looks. "Define easier," Marcus said with a wry smile. "Your feet will toughen, your muscles will adapt. But the road has a way of presenting new challenges just when you think you've mastered the old ones. The question isn't when it gets easier, but when you get stronger." That night, Kai lay awake despite his exhaustion, studying the vast tapestry of stars above. The sky seemed impossibly larger than it had from his village, as if leaving home had somehow expanded the universe itself. He thought of Master Chun's journal, still unopened in his pack, and decided it was time to begin recording his journey. By firelight, he wrote, "Day 3. I thought I knew what tired meant. I was wrong. But today, for the first time, I walked an entire hour without thinking about the pain." Lyra says this is progress. "I'm not sure if my body is adapting or if my mind is simply learning to exist alongside discomfort. Perhaps they're the same thing." The merchants tell stories in the evening. Tonight, one spoke of a city where buildings touch the clouds and knowledge flows like water. Another described storms in the desert that can strip flesh from bone. I don't know which stories are true, but I find I don't care. The possibility is enough. I'm beginning to understand that the world is larger than truth or fiction. It's made of experiences, each one reshaping the person who lives it. The next morning brought a new challenge. The road forked, and the caravan master called for a vote on which route to take. The northern path was shorter, but passed through territory where bandits had been reported. The southern route added 2 days to their journey, but was generally safer. Kai watched in fascination as the group debated. Some argued for speed, others for safety. Lyra listened to all sides before speaking. "In my experience," she said, "the safer path often presents its own dangers, complacency, lost time that could mean missing market opportunities, the wear of extra days on our supplies. The dangerous path at least keeps us alert. I vote north, but with doubled watches and weapons ready." The vote went narrowly in favor of the northern route. As they prepared to move out, Kai approached Lyra. "Weren't you afraid to vote for danger?" "Fear and wisdom aren't opposites," she replied, checking her sword. "Fear says be careful. Wisdom says be prepared. It's when fear says don't move that it becomes a problem. Besides, calculated risks are part of growth. You can't discover your capabilities by always choosing comfort." The northern path wound through a narrow canyon, its walls rising like ancient sentinels on either side. The caravan moved in tense silence, every shadow a potential threat. Kai found his senses sharpening, his awareness expanding beyond his own discomfort to encompass the environment around him. It was Marcus who spotted them first, a flutter of movement on the canyon rim. His sharp whistle brought the caravan to an immediate halt. "Watchers," he called out. "Could be bandits, could be curious locals. Stay alert, but don't appear hostile." What followed was Kai's first lesson in the delicate art of projection, appearing strong enough to discourage attack without seeming aggressive enough to provoke one. The guards spread out, hands near but not on their weapons, their postures relaxed but ready. A voice called down from the rocks, speaking in a dialect Kai didn't recognize. One of the merchants, a polyglot named Chen Wei, responded in kind. A tense negotiation followed, with Chen Wei translating. "They're not bandits," he reported. "Local hunters. They want a toll for passage through their hunting grounds. It's not legal, but it's not uncommon." The caravan master, a shrewd woman named Madame Zhou, considered. "How much?" "More than we should pay, less than fighting would cost us," Chen Wei replied diplomatically. Kai watched as Madame Zhou made a counteroffer, not in coin but in trade goods, salt, which was precious in these remote areas, and metal arrowheads superior to the stone ones the hunters used. The negotiation continued, a dance of offer and counteroffer, until agreement was reached. As they passed through the canyon unmolested, Lyra explained, "First lesson of the road, not every confrontation needs to end in conflict. Sometimes the brave choice is to find common ground, to transform potential enemies into temporary allies." "But they were extorting us," Kai protested. "From their perspective, we were trespassing on their ancestral hunting grounds," Marcus countered. "Whose right depends on whose laws you follow, whose history you honor. The road teaches you that truth has many faces, and wisdom lies in seeing as many of them as possible." That evening, they camped at a caravanserai, a fortified rest stop where multiple trade routes converged. The courtyard buzzed with a dozen languages, the air rich with the sense of spices and stories from across the continent. Kai found himself overwhelmed by the sheer diversity of humanity gathered in one place. A storyteller held court near the central fire, weaving tailies for copper coins. Kai joined the audience, listening to a story about a phoenix that burned itself to ash every 100 years, only to rise renewed. "The phoenix doesn't fear the fire," the storyteller intoned, "because it knows that destruction and creation are two faces of the same coin. What seems like an ending is often a beginning in disguise." Later, as Kai helped tend the animals, he found himself working alongside a young woman from a distant southern province. She introduced herself as Shan, a healer's apprentice traveling to study with a renowned master in the capital. "Weren't you afraid to travel so far alone?" Kai asked. Shan laughed, a sound like silver bells. "I wasn't alone. I traveled with my fear, my determination, and my purpose. They're demanding companions, but reliable ones. Besides, I carry my teacher's wisdom with me." She touched a pendant at her throat. "She told me that knowledge hoarded is knowledge wasted. What good is healing skill if I only use it for those in my small town? The world's suffering is vast. Shouldn't our response be equally expansive?" Her words stayed with Kai as he settled in for the night. In his journal, he wrote, Day 7, met a healer named Shan today. She said something that struck me. Knowledge hoarded is knowledge wasted. I think about all the things I'm learning. Not just about travel and trade, but about human nature, about courage, about the vastness of the world. What responsibility comes with this knowledge? How will I use it? The storyteller's phoenix keeps returning to my mind. I left my village thinking I was seeking adventure, but perhaps what I'm really seeking is transformation. The comfortable. Kai, who lived within those walls, needed to burn away to make room for whoever I'm becoming. The fire is painful, but maybe that's the point. The next leg of their journey took them through the Whispering Forest, a place where local legends spoke of trees that held the memories of all who passed beneath their boughs. Kai found himself standing with his pack, suddenly adrift without the structure that had defined his days since leaving home. What now? He asked Lyra. She smiled, but there was a seriousness in her eyes. Now comes the real test. The road provides purpose through movement. The city demands you create your own purpose while standing still. I have contacts here, a place to stay while I arrange my next journey. You're welcome to join me until you find your footing. Grateful for the lifeline, Kai followed her through the maze of streets to a modest inn called the Wanderer's Rest. The proprietor, a mountain of a woman named Auntie Hua, greeted Lyra like a long-lost daughter. Back again, little warrior? And with a stray puppy, I see. Her laugh boomed through the common room. First time in the capital, boy? Is it that obvious? Kai asked, his village accent suddenly feeling thick on his tongue. You still have road dust in your wonder, Auntie Hua said not unkindly. The city will polish that away soon enough. But maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. Wonder's a currency too many spend too quickly here. Lyra negotiated rooms and meals with practiced ease while Kai absorbed the inn's atmosphere. The common room was filled with travelers from every corner of the empire, scholars with ink-stained fingers debating philosophy, merchants tallying profits on well-worn abacuses, performers practicing their arts in corners, and weathered adventurers nursing drinks and older wounds. This is one of the city's hearts, Lyra explained as they found seats. Every city has multiple hearts, you see. The palace is the political heart, the market's the commercial heart, the temple's the spiritual heart. But places like this is where the stories flow, where connections are made, where journeys begin and end. An old man at the next table turned at her words. His clothes marked him as a scholar, but his eyes held depths that suggested harder-won wisdom than any library could provide. Young lady speaks truth, he said, raising his cup in salute. Professor Wei, formerly of the Imperial Academy, currently of wherever curiosity leads. And you, young man, have the look of someone whose story is just beginning to unfold. Kai, recently of the road, currently of confusion, Kai replied, surprising himself with the ease of the introduction. Professor Wei laughed, a sound like rustling parchment. Confusion is wisdom's younger brother. May I share your table? I find myself between appointments and in need of distraction from my own circling thoughts. What followed was Kai's first taste of the city's intellectual feast. Professor Wei spoke of philosophies from distant lands, of scientific discoveries that challenged ancient assumptions, of art that captured the ineffable and made it tangible. But more than the content, it was the professor's approach that captivated Kai, the way he questioned everything, including his own assertions. The greatest tragedy of the human mind, Professor Wei said, warming to his theme, is when it stops asking, what if? The moment we believe we have all the answers, we stop growing. The city, for all its flaws, never stops asking questions. That's why I remain here, despite its noise and crowding. It's a vast library of human potential. But how do you find your place in something so vast? Kai asked. On the road, I knew my role. Here, I feel like a drop of water trying to understand the ocean. Ah, but that's the beauty of it, the professor replied. A drop of water contains the same essence as the ocean. Start small. Find one thing that calls to you, pursue it, and let it lead you to the next thing. The city isn't meant to be conquered all at once. It's meant to be discovered one revelation at a time. Over the following days, Kai took the professor's advice. Each morning, he chose a different direction and walked until something caught his attention. The first day led him to the artisan's quarter, where he watched a master potter transform lumps of clay into vessels of breathtaking beauty. The clay doesn't become the pot, the potter explained when Kai lingered to watch. The pot was always within the clay. I merely help it emerge. People are the same. We don't become something foreign to our nature. We reveal what was always within, waiting for the right pressure, the right heat, the right hands to shape us. The second day brought him to the street of scribes where words flowed like water and ideas were traded like currency. He spent hours in a small bookshop. The owner, a bird-like woman named Mistress Fay, introducing him to texts he'd never dreamed existed. Knowledge is the only wealth that multiplies when shared, she told him, pressing a slim volume of poetry into his hands. This writer came from a village much like yours, I'd wager. Read how he transformed his simple beginnings into universal truth. That's the alchemist's real secret, not turning lead to gold, but turning personal experience into shared wisdom. On the third day, wandering without destination, Kai found himself in a district he immediately sensed was different. The buildings were shabbier, the streets narrower, the faces more guarded. He was about to turn back when he heard music. Not the refined melodies of the entertainment district, but something raw and real that spoke of struggle transformed into beauty. Following the sound, he discovered a small courtyard where an elderly woman played a battered erhu while children danced. Their clothes were patched, their feet bare, but their joy was undiluted. When the music ended, the children scattered too. Collect coins from the small audience. You play beautifully, Kai told the musician, dropping coins into her cup. She studied him with eyes that had seen too much, yet somehow retained their spark. Beauty isn't about perfection, young man. It's about truth. These children know hunger, but they also know joy. My instrument is missing strings, but it still sings. The poor districts, we understand something the wealthy quarters forget, that life's richness isn't measured in gold. Grandmother. Yun speaks wisdom, a voice said behind Kai. He turned to find Shan, the healer from the caravan, carrying a basket of herbs. I didn't expect to see you here, Kai. I'm exploring, he said, then gestured to her basket. Are you working? Learning, she corrected. My master serves anyone who needs healing, regardless of ability to pay. The poor districts teach different lessons about medicine, how to heal with limited resources, how to treat not just the body, but the spirit broken by hardship. Come, walk with me. I'll show you another side of the city. As they walked, Shan pointed out details Kai had missed. Herb gardens growing on rooftops, communal kitchens where neighbors pooled resources, elderly residents teaching trades to orphan children. The city has many faces, she explained. The golden towers you saw when you arrived? That's one face. But this, the resilience, the community forged by necessity, the beauty that blooms in cracks, this is equally true. Neither is the whole story. They arrived at a modest building marked with the healer's symbol. Inside, patients waited. With patience born of having few options. Shan's master, a stern woman named Master Ling, looked up from treating a child's fever. Another assistant, Shan? We barely have supplies for one. A friend, Master. Kai, from the caravan where I found the silver leaf. Master Ling's expression softened slightly. Ah, the one who ventured into the forest for a stranger. Good hands are always welcome, even untrained ones. Can you follow instructions without question? Kai nodded, and suddenly found himself thrust into a world of practical compassion. He held patients steady while Master Ling set bones, prepared herbal mixtures under Shan's guidance, and distributed medicine with careful instructions repeated in multiple dialects. "Your village healer taught you well," Master Ling observed, noting how he instinctively knew to speak softly to frightened children and firmly to elderly patients who needed confidence more than sympathy. "I only watched sometimes," Kai admitted. "I never thought I was learning." "All of life is learning, if we pay attention," Master Ling replied. "The question is whether we recognize the lessons when we need them." As the day wore on, Kai found himself drawn into the rhythm of the clinic. Each patient brought a story: the seamstress whose hands shook from years of fine work, the laborer whose back bore the weight of building the city's beauty, the young mother whose cough spoke of damp housing and too many worries. "This is another kind of journey," he told Shan during a brief break. "Not across distances, but across the boundaries between lives." "The hardest borders to cross are often invisible," she agreed. "Between rich and poor, healthy and sick, hope and despair. But healing, real healing, requires us to cross them daily." That evening, Kai returned to the Wanderer's Rest with new eyes. The common room's comfortable chaos now seemed almost decadent compared to what he'd witnessed. Yet he also understood that this too was necessary, the place where stories were shared, where travelers found respite, where the city's many threads wove together. Lyra found him writing in his journal, trying to capture the day's revelations. "You've been exploring," she noted, reading his expression more than his words. "The city is teaching me things I didn't know I needed to learn," Kai said. On the road, the lessons were clear: survive, adapt, keep moving. Here, everything is contradiction. Wealth and poverty, beauty and squalor, connection and isolation, all existing in the same breath. "That's the city's gift," Lyra said, joining him at the table. "It forces you to hold multiple truths simultaneously. The road teaches you to adapt to external challenges. The city teaches you to navigate internal complexity." Professor Wei, who had become a regular dinner companion, added his perspective. "Consider the lotus, young Kai. It grows in mud, pushes through murky water, yet blooms pure and untainted. The city is humanity's mud, all our basest impulses and greatest aspirations mixed together. What blooms from that mixture depends entirely on what we choose to nurture within ourselves." Over the following weeks, Kai developed a routine that wove together his various discoveries. Mornings at the clinic, learning the art of healing both body and hope. Afternoons in the artisan's quarter, where Master Chen the potter had agreed to teach him in exchange for help with the heavy work. Evenings at the inn, absorbing stories and wisdom from the constant flow of travelers. Each experience added layers to his understanding. The potter taught him about patience, how the finest work required not just skill but timing, knowing when to apply pressure and when to let things rest. The clinic revealed the interconnectedness of all suffering and the equal interconnectedness of compassion. The inn's story showed him that every person was walking their own epic journey, even if it looked ordinary from the outside. One evening, a commotion in the street drew everyone to the windows. A religious procession was passing, devotees carrying elaborate shrines while musicians played and dancers whirled. The display was magnificent, all gold and silk and synchronized. "Movement, beautiful," someone murmured. "Empty," countered another. "All show, no substance." Kai watched the procession, then looked back at the inn's common room, travelers in worn clothes sharing simple meals and profound stories. He thought of Grandmother Yun's broken instrument making perfect music, of Master Ling healing with herbs and wisdom when costly medicines weren't available. "Maybe," he said slowly, "beauty and substance aren't opposites. Maybe they're different languages for the same truth. The procession speaks to those who need splendor to feel the sacred. This room speaks to those who find the sacred in simplicity. The city has space for both." Professor Wei beamed at him. Now you're thinking like a philosopher. The ability to see validity in seemingly contradictory viewpoints. That's wisdom beginning to bloom. That night, Kai climbed to the inn's roof garden, a small oasis Auntie Hua maintained for guests who needed sky and growing things. Cities sprawled below him, thousands of lights creating constellations that rivaled the stars above. Somewhere in that maze of streets, Grandmother Yun was probably playing her erhu. Master Ling was likely still working by candlelight. Master Chun's pottery sat in shops and homes, holding everything from water to dreams. He pulled out Master Chun's journal, the one from his village teacher, not the potter, and read his latest entry aloud to the night. Day 42 in Jinshan. The city is a mirror, but not the kind that shows your face. It's the kind that shows your soul, every fear, every prejudice, every limitation, but also every capacity for growth, for compassion, for transformation. I came here thinking I needed to find my place. I'm learning instead that I need to create it, choice by choice, action by action. Tomorrow, Master Ling is taking me to the Palace District to help treat a merchant's family. She says I'm ready to see how the wealthy suffer differently, but equally. Master Chun wants me to attempt my first pot. He says my hands know more. Then my mind realizes. And there's a new caravan forming, heading west toward the desert kingdoms. Lyra says there's always room for those who've proven themselves. I'm not ready to leave yet. The city still has lessons to teach, and I have much to learn. But I'm beginning to understand something crucial. Readiness isn't about completing your education. It's about being prepared to let every experience educate you. The city, like the road, is just another teacher. The real journey is internal, and it never truly ends. A night bird called from somewhere in the garden, its song threading through the urban symphony below. Kai closed the journal and sat in meditation, not seeking answers but simply being present to the questions. The city pulsed around him, million-hearted and endlessly complex, and he felt himself not lost within it, but part of it. Another story being written, another truth being discovered, another drop of consciousness in the vast ocean of human experience. In the morning, he would return to the clinic, to the pottery wheel, to the endless lessons hiding in plain sight. But for now, he sat with the truth Professor Wei had shared, that wisdom begins not with knowing, but with wondering, not with answers, but with better questions. The city of mirrors had shown him many reflections, but the most important was this: he was not a fixed entity, seeking his proper place, but a dynamic being capable of creating meaning wherever he stood. The road had taught him to move. The city was teaching him to grow in place, to bloom where he was planted while keeping his roots ready for the next transplanting. And in that balance, between movement and stillness, between adapting and creating, between journey and destination, he was discovering not just who he was, but who he was becoming. The Western caravan departed Jinshan on a morning when the sky bled crimson warnings of the heat to come. Kai stood with his new companions at the city's western gate, his pack reorganized with desert necessities, extra water skins, cloth for head wrappings, and the dried foods that would sustain them across the vast emptiness ahead. Second thoughts? Lyra asked, noting his contemplative expression. Third and fourth thoughts, Kai admitted. But Master Ling says doubt is just wisdom gathering its courage. Besides, the desert has been calling to me since Professor Wei described it as the place where all unnecessary things burn away, leaving only essence. This caravan was smaller than his first. Only 8 traders, 6 guards, and 3 travelers, seeking passage. Among them was a mysterious woman named Zara, whose dark skin and unusual accent marked her as from beyond the desert, from the legendary kingdoms where sand met sea. You travel to find something, she said to Kai on their first night out of the city, her voice carrying the musical cadence of distant shores. All who choose the desert road seek something. The wise ones understand they usually find something quite different than what they sought. What do you seek? Kai asked. Zara smiled, her teeth white against desert-darkened skin. I seek the way home. But first, I must remember why I left. The desert helps with such remembering. It strips away the stories we tell ourselves, leaving only truth. As the days passed and the landscape transformed from green to gold to the bleached bones of true desert, Kai began to understand her meaning. The desert was unlike any challenge he'd faced. The road had tested his body, the city his mind, but the desert seemed to test his very soul. Water became precious beyond measure. Every drop was counted, rationed, savored. The first time Kai saw a merchant pay more for a small barrel of water than for a bolt of silk, he truly understood the desert's first lesson. Value is determined by necessity, not beauty. In my village, he told Marcus one evening as they made camp in the shelter of towering red rocks, we complained when we had to walk to the well twice a day. Now I would weep with joy to see that well. The desert teaches gratitude, Marcus agreed. Also humility. See those rocks? They've stood for thousands of years, watching caravans pass like drops of rain. We think we're important, but to the desert, we're just another temporary arrangement of dust and water. The days fell into a rhythm dictated by the sun. Travel. In the cool hours of dawn and dusk, shelter through the brutal midday heat. Kai learned to read the subtle signs of the landscape, which rocks offered shade, which directions the rare breezes came from, how the color of sand could indicate the presence of water far below. On the 10th day, they encountered their first real crisis. A sandstorm rose from the south, a wall of brown fury that blotted out the sun. The caravan master, a desert veteran named Hassan, called for immediate preparation. Circle the camels. Secure everything that can fly. Cover your faces and huddle low. Kai helped drive stakes and stretch cloths to create windbreaks, his hands working automatically while his mind reeled at the storm's approaching power. When it hit, the world disappeared into a howling brown chaos that seemed to last forever. He found himself pressed against Zara and a young trader named Lin, sharing a cloth shelter that bucked and strained against the wind. Sand found every gap, filling mouths and noses, turning breath into struggle. Tell stories, Zara commanded. Over the wind's roar. In my land, we believe stories hold power against the storm. They remind us that this too shall pass. Lin began, his voice shaky but determined, telling of his grandmother's garden where flowers bloomed in impossible colors. Zara followed with a tale of pearl divers who could hold their breath for entire songs. When Kai's turn came, he found himself speaking of Master Chen, the village teacher who had planted the seeds of his journey. He told me once that storms, whether of sand or circumstance, serve a purpose. They force us to find our center, to discover what we hold onto when everything else is stripped away. I didn't understand then. I think I'm beginning to now. The storm passed with the suddenness of all desert phenomena, leaving them half buried but alive. As they dug out their supplies and checked for damage, Kai noticed something profound. The landscape had completely changed. Dunes had shifted, familiar landmarks vanished, new paths revealed. The desert remakes itself constantly, Hassan explained as they charted a new course. Those who survive here learn to navigate by stars and sun, not by land. The external shifts, but the eternal remains constant. That night, cleaning sand from his belongings, Kai discovered that his journal had survived intact, wrapped in oilcloth. As Lyra had taught him, he wrote by firelight, Day 10, survived first sandstorm. The desert is teaching me about impermanence in ways the city never could. There, change was human-driven, comprehensible. Here, change is fundamental, divine, indifferent to human plans. But perhaps that's the lesson. We cannot control the storms, only our response to them. The sand will settle where it wills. We can only choose whether to be buried or to dig ourselves free and continue. Zara says the desert purifies. I'm beginning. To understand, it's not cruel, merely honest. It shows you exactly who you are when all pretense is blown away. As they traveled deeper into the desert's heart, the lessons intensified. A miscalculation in water rationing left them dangerously low 3 days from the next oasis. Watching Hassan make the hard decisions, which animals to preserve, which loads to abandon, Kai saw leadership stripped to its essence. A leader's job, Hassan told him as they buried trade goods they couldn't carry, marking the spot for possible future retrieval, is not to prevent all hardship, but to guide others through it. The desert doesn't care about our comfort, only our survival. A good leader aligns with that truth. When they finally reached the oasis, Kai experienced gratitude as a physical sensation, a whole body relief at the sight of green palms and clear water. But even paradise had its lessons. The oasis was occupied by another caravan, and negotiation was required for access to the best camping spots and water sources. Kai watched Hassan navigate the delicate politics, neither aggressive nor submissive, finding the balance that acknowledged everyone's needs while protecting his people's interests. It was, Kai realized, another form of the desert's teaching. Resources were finite, cooperation essential, but strength still respected. Among the other caravan was a storyteller named Rashid, whose reputation had spread across the trade routes. That night, both caravans gathered to hear him weave his magic. "I will tell you," Rashid began, his voice carrying the authority of one who had earned his wisdom through miles rather than books, "of the merchant of mirrors who crossed this very desert carrying nothing but reflections." The story unfolded. Like a desert flower, each petal a revelation. The merchant, seeking to trade in the most valuable commodity, had commissioned mirrors of every size and quality. But the desert had tested him. Bandits had taken his guards, storms his camels, until he was left with only the mirrors he could carry. At the great oasis, perhaps this very one, he set up his remaining mirrors and waited. Travelers came to look, expecting to see themselves. But the desert had changed the merchant, and somehow his mirrors had changed too. Each person saw not their face, but their truth. The vain saw their insecurity, the cruel their fear, the kind their strength. Some fled in horror, others wept with recognition, but all left transformed. What happened to the merchant? A young voice asked from the crowd. Rashid smiled. He discovered that the most valuable trade was not in silver or gold, but in revelation. He remained at the oasis, they say, offering truth to any brave enough to look. Some say he's still there, in places where the sand meets the soul, waiting for those ready to see. After the gathering dispersed, Kai found himself walking the oasis perimeter with Zara. The stars above were brilliant in the clear desert air, each one sharp as a needlepoint. "Do you believe it?" he asked. "The story of the mirrors?" "I believe all stories are true somewhere," Zara replied. "But more importantly, I believe we are all merchants of mirrors, carrying reflections we offer to others. The question is, do our mirrors show truth or illusion?" Her words stayed with him as the caravan continued its journey. In each interaction, he began to see the mirrors people carried. Lynn reflected ambition tinged with fear. Marcus showed strength built on old pain. Lyra's mirror revealed depth beneath her practical exterior. And Zara's mirrors seemed to shift like the desert itself, showing different truths from different angles. The halfway point of their desert crossing was marked by an ancient caravanserai, a fortified rest stop built centuries ago. Its walls were covered with inscriptions, left by countless travelers, prayers, warnings, poetry, and simple marks indicating, "I was here." "This is the desert's guest book," Hassan explained as Kai traced some of the older inscriptions. "Every traveler leaves something, takes something. It's been this way for generations." Kai spent hours reading the walls, finding wisdom in multiple languages across centuries of human experience. One inscription particularly moved him, I came seeking gold, I leave having found myself. The desert takes everything, but gives you the only thing that matters, the knowledge of what remains when all else is gone. That night, he carefully carved his own inscription. The desert taught me that I am both less and more than I believed. Less important to the universe, more capable than I knew. The second half of the journey brought new challenges. They were attacked by bandits at a narrow pass, and Kai experienced his first real combat. It was nothing like the stories, no glory, no clear heroes and villains, just desperate people, fighting over scarce resources. When it was over, 2 bandits lay dead, Marcus was wounded, and Kai's hands shook for hours. First blood is always the hardest, Lyra said, finding him sitting alone after the battle. Take no pride in it, but no excessive shame either. We defended ourselves, nothing more. The desert makes everyone desperate eventually. I trained for this, Kai said, his voice hollow. I thought I was ready, but taking a life changes you, Lyra finished. As it should. The day killing becomes easy is the day you lose something essential. But sometimes the desert demands terrible choices. We can only try to choose with wisdom rather than anger. As Marcus healed and they continued on, Kai noticed how the desert was changing him physically. His skin had darkened to protect against the sun. His body had learned to conserve energy, to move with economy. But the internal changes were more profound. He found himself speaking less, each word chosen with the same care as water rations. Silence, he discovered, had its own eloquence. One evening, as they camped in the shadow of ancient ruins, Zara taught him her people's practice of sand meditation. Using colored sand carried for the purpose, she created intricate patterns that told stories without words. In my homeland, she explained as her fingers guided sand into spirals and symbols, we believe thoughts are like sand, infinite, shifting, capable of being shaped but never truly held. Watch. She completed an elaborate mandala depicting their journey, each swirl representing a day, each color an experience. Then, with a gentle breath, she scattered it all. Impermanence is not loss, she said, seeing Kai's expression. It's freedom. We create, we appreciate, we release. Attachment to the creation brings suffering. Joy in the creating brings wisdom. Kai tried his own sand painting, attempting to capture his transformation from village boy to desert traveler. The image was clumsy compared to Zara's, but something in the process spoke to him. When he scattered his creation, he felt a weight he hadn't known he carried dissolve with the sand. The last days of the desert crossing were marked by a phenomenon Hassan called the true seeing. The combination of heat, exhaustion, and monotony could produce visions, not mere mirages of water, but profound hallucinations that revealed inner truths. Kai experienced his true seeing on the 41st day. The caravan seemed to stretch impossibly long, each member trailing stories like silk scarves. He saw Lin's fears as dark birds circling overhead. Marcus's strength appeared as armor that both protected and imprisoned him. Lyra walked wreathed in the faces of all she'd helped and lost. When he looked at his own reflection in a water bowl, he saw not one face but many, the boy from the village, the young man who'd walked with wolves, the helper in the clinic, the student of clay and philosophy. All were true, all were him, yet he was somehow more than their sum. The true seeing comes to those the desert deems ready, Hassan said when Kai described his experience. It's said to show not what is, but what could be. Use the vision wisely. On the 45th day, they saw green on the horizon, not another mirage, but the true oasis that marked the desert's western edge. The caravan's joy was palpable but tinged with something deeper. They had entered the desert as a collection of individuals. They emerged as something else, a tribe forged by shared extremity. That final night in the desert, they held a ceremony of thanksgiving. Each person spoke of what they'd learned, what they'd lost, what they'd found. When Kai's turn came, he stood under the vast star field and spoke from his heart. I entered the desert seeking adventure, thinking it would be about conquering the sand. Instead, the sand conquered me, my pride, my illusions, my unnecessary attachments. But in that defeat, I found victory. I learned that strength isn't about domination, but about adaptation. That wisdom comes not from having answers, but from surviving questions. That we are all more resilient and more fragile than we know. He paused, gathering his thoughts. The desert taught me that transformation isn't comfortable. It's not supposed to be. Comfort preserves. Discomfort transforms. I'm grateful for every burning day, every freezing night, every moment when I thought I couldn't continue but did. Because now I know I can cross any desert, external or internal, as long as I remember to carry only what's essential and to share what I have with fellow travelers. Zara was the last to speak. In my language we have a word, Sara, which means both desert and dawn. Because the desert is where old things die, so new things can be born. We have all died a little on this journey. May we all be reborn a little wiser. The next morning, as they prepared for the final day's march to the trading city of Saman, Kai packed his belongings with reverent care. His journal, filled with desert observations. His clothes, now the color of sand in memory. The small vial of sand Zara had gifted him, to remember when you need to create and release. But the most important things he carried required no space in his pack: the patience of stones, the flexibility of sand, the certainty that he could survive. Being stripped down to essence and rebuilt. The desert had been a harsh teacher, but a thorough one. As the caravan crested the final dune and saw the river valley spread below, green and impossibly lush after so much brown, Kai felt completion and beginning in the same breath. The desert was ending, but its lessons were now part of him, carved as deeply as wind-carved stone. He thought of Master Chen, the village teacher who had first spoken of journeys. He wondered if the old sage had known that the greatest journeys were not about reaching destinations, but about being transformed by the passage. Probably, Kai decided. Wisdom recognizes wisdom, even across the distances of time and sand. The caravan descended toward the river, toward new adventures and teachings. But Kai carried the desert within him now, a place of terrible honesty and profound truth, where everything unnecessary burned away, leaving only what mattered: courage, compassion, and the knowledge that he could survive any transformation life demanded. The desert's final gift was this understanding: we are all more than we appear, stronger than we believe, and capable of crossing any wasteland if we remember that the journey's purpose is not to remain unchanged, but to emerge, refined like gold tested in fire, like souls polished by sand and stars. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.